Hey, Trails Collective, Ian here, coming at you with a review of the Saucony Switchback 2.
Cause I wanna be like the wind. I wanna run with you. We can be wolves, howling at the gray white moon. I wanna be by your side when we light up the sky for the world to see. Run, 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 run with me.
So unlike road shoes, I kind of get a kick out of an affinity toward the names that companies use for trail models. Whether it be models like the Hoka Speed Goat, named after Karl Meltzer, the maybe Topo Mountain Racer, which I think performs and is ode to really what the shoe is designed for. Whether it be the Brooks Catamount, being a general word for, I think, mountain cat, but I think specifically named after the NASCAR driver Ricky Bobby, who had an affinity to train and drive with live cougars in the car.
What the hell? It's a goddamn cougar in the car. Oh, there's a cougar in the car. I put it in there. You gotta learn to drive with the fear. And there ain't nothing more goddamn frightening than driving with a live cougar in the car.
Or something like that. And the name Switchback, I don't know, it connects or it resonates. I think when I think of, or in the moment thinking of switchbacks, maybe it's all the switchbacks that I intentionally avoided in creating the White Face Sky Races course. One of the more, I think, potent images that literally is visceral inside of me is all of the switchbacks maybe rising up from where I used to live on Oahu, going up through the lush jungle at night under headlamp before the lights of Honolulu would just kind of explode in the distance in the sky. I think it really speaks to us as trail runners. So I dig it and connect with it. So the Switchback 2 specs, its listed weight is 8.3 or 8.8 ounces for men and 7.8 ounces for women. Using the shop scale, I weighed it in a bit heavier on the men's at 9.3 ounces, and for women's, pretty close at, actually is right on, at 7.8 ounces for that's a women's 7.5. The difference between the prior version 1, I think this weighed in at maybe like 10.2 or 10.3 ounces when I weighed it. So the version 2 a bit lighter. And yeah, so just on the spec end, stack heights are 22 millimeters in the heel, 18 in the forefoot for a relative drop or offset of 4 millimeters. The stack heights also being 22-18 keeps it pretty low on the spectrum or paradigm, probably lower than most any of the shoes I think behind me or on most trail walls, and it keeps it feeling really light and really minimal. And it is an ode really to some of Saucony's history. I think one of the similar models, I don't know, probably, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, was the Kinvara Trail, which they had in the line for a couple years. And I'll be excited to see this one stick around for a bit, so I'm hopeful. The cost, $140 at retail on the upper end, but also I think speaks to just some of the technical nature of the shoe. So let's get into it and break it down from the ground up. Let's see, outsole material of the Switchback 2 has pretty low profile lugs. I don't know the actual measurement, but they look to me to be about 2 millimeters. They use a fairly traditional chevron design, which provides a little bit of traction or allows you to really claw when you're ascending, and a reversed chevron design for the heel to allow you some traction if you're sitting back on the descents. Fairly open design between the lugs, which I think allows it to shave weight as well as have a really good amount of flexibility to the shoe. And you can see underneath the outsole rubber, in this case they're using their, what's the name? It's called the Power Track. It's their sticky rubber. That's welded on or overlaid onto what you can see underneath in the green is a RockPlate. I believe this rock plate is made of a TPU material. They'll all have to verify that. And that's in the front, probably 60% of the shoe. And then the outsole overlaid onto what they're using as a Power Run Plus midsole material here. The general shape or contours of the outsole design, because it's so split up in this hex pattern, it's got a lot of flexibility to it, so it doesn't necessarily need flex grooves underneath your metatarsals. And it also has a fairly rounded design with a lug pattern that really goes out around the shoe in a 360-degree pattern. Some of the outsole designs in trail model, or actually shoes in general, sometimes will have a break or a contour for a heel strike pattern to basically smooth or slow out a pronation or transition from the heel. Sometimes I'll get a little bit longer or greater durability when models come with that break there. But with all models, based on me having fairly bowed lower legs and a bit of fairly, I think, probably more than the normal inversion based on the articulation in my ankle, I tend to really shave off all outsoles. So just this shape, for me, making point of contact there, I think allows it to be really smooth at first point of contact there. Moving up the shoe a bit, the midsole material they're using here is a Power Run Plus material. I really like the Power Run. It was used in this is the Mad River 2. The Mad River 1 was, I think, one of my favorite shoes coming out of 2019. Also used Power Run. I don't remember whether it was a Power Run Plus, but I really like it. The Switchback 1 used a full-length Everrun midsole material. Everrun, in my opinion, was just a little bit too, I think, soft and unstable. So moving to the Power Run Plus, I think it allows it to have a more stable or responsive underfoot feel on varied terrains. To me, it feels fairly soft and is also a pretty light material. So I think it's a really great blend as a material. Looking at the sock liner of the shoe, moving up, fairly unremarkable in terms of a sock liner, but for trail shoes, I think that's a good thing. There are some models, for instance, in this Topo Mountain Racer, uses a fairly plush Ortholite midsole. Feels really soft out of the box, and I think that's kind of what the companies want. It kind of sells you right on that first point of contact or feel. Downside is on a trail model, though, Ortholite tends to really suck up and absorb moisture. In this model, after some of the creek crossings in my initial testing, I let it sit for a full, I think, 8-hour shift at work, picked it up and still squeezed it out just like a sponge. So not the greatest. So when I say that there's a fairly unremarkable sock liner insole here, which is using what appears to be just closed cell foam or EVA, I think that's a good thing. Moving up the shoe a bit. On the upper, one of the most, I think, noticeable features of the shoe, at least particularly in the Switchback 1, was its use of the Boa Lacing system. Boa is not new for shoes. I think when I first opened the store, maybe 15 years or so ago, we were carrying Vask at the time, and I think Vask had a Boa Lacing system model, and it worked pretty decent. I've seen, I think, a few more designs in this past year or two that have also gone back at Boa. I think it works pretty well, but I think it's outside of, I think, a lot of runners' just comfort zones or awareness zones, or even just the aesthetic combination of all those. So it doesn't always hit, but I think when it does, it works pretty well and is pretty effective. So whereas on the version 1 of the Switchback last year, it had a fairly typical design of the Boa Lace System cinching together the vamp or the upper over top of a fairly minimal but traditional tongue design. The Switchback 2 changes it up and uses the Boa Lace design still on the outside, but pulling together a really redesigned upper in this version 2. And so in addition to just that visually kind of striking Boa Lace system, is just the design of the upper, which has a really, I think, clean look and aesthetic. And I think, I don't know, I think it's pretty awesome. And so what it is it's basically the model has an inner layer of fairly soft material that really creates just a sock-like fit. There's no articulations or gussets to this model, similar to what we had in the Mad River 1. And I think it creates just a glove-like fit around the foot. To give it integrity as well as protection, this version 2 moved to basically a shroud design which really wraps over the instep as the vamp. And as we just showed or exemplified, the Boa Lace system acts to really cinch that shroud down. I think it's really effective and quick and easy. The Boa Lace system really, unlike a clip I'll play from, and let me look here because I want to provide credit where credit is due. Unlike the two Gen Zers in Kevin Bumstead's must-watch YouTube video from 2018, where the Gen Zers are challenged to figure out how to dial a rotary phone,
zero all the way around.
the Boa Lace system, I think, is like precision fit on a speed dial. So to loosen it, pop it out. That allows the upper to just de-articulate or loosen up. When you're ready to cinch it up, just push it in and dial it right in. I think my opening mile or so in the Switchback 2, I think I cinched down that boa a little bit too tight. I was feeling a little bit of pressure on the outside of my foot, but it was really quick and easy just to reach down, pop that out, allow it to loosen, and just close it back up and go again. I think it, again, works really well in design. The upper material in the sock-like interior, it's more padded over the top of your instep, so it doesn't irritate your navicular and cuneiform bones, which would be those kind of hard bones on the top of your foot. It does wrap over, and on the sides, it turns into a little bit more of a traditional mesh design, which allows the shoe a little bit more breathability and drainage. The heel cup is fairly flexible. There is a piece of what I imagine is just plastic in there, but it's fairly malleable. And then there's pull loops over what would be a traditional tongue point and the heel to allow you to just quick slip that shoe right on. It has various laminations welded on in the upper. It has a toe guard or toe cap just to provide a little bit of protection from kicking rocks. And it also has some of the synthetic leathers or material wrapping around the lateral and medial parts of the lower shoe. And this allows it just to have, I think, a little bit more integrity if you're on off-camber surfaces to keep your foot over the base of the shoe. So they're really, I think, the specs and design of the shoe as a whole, really light, really minimal, and I think it's a pretty fantastic shoe. So in terms of how it rides and just getting to know the shoe, which is really important, for me, I guess in thinking on this, I was thinking, so my first car as a teenager was a 1987 Honda Accord hatchback. I really loved that car. I probably made some, unfortunately, maybe typical or questionable decisions on said use of that vehicle, but I think it's appropriate here. So that Honda Accord, I took that with a bit of assistance from a descent up to 140 miles per hour. I took that car off-roading on some fairly steep grades, and even took it for some laps on multiple occasions around our old cinder track at our high school. I feel like I'm probably out of school enough, and there's a whole new facility there where I'm maybe safe to say that at that point. And I also got pretty good in learning to bank the car up on medians around curves. So all that's to say, I think, explored the outer limits of what that car could really do. And I think that's applicable here because the Switchback 2, you also just have to learn, I think, what it's made for, what it's good at, and what it's not. So some of the downsides, as I mentioned, outsole configuration and rubber so I think one of the first runs out of the box for me in the Switchback 1 last year was just jumping into the Castle River 50K in the Hudson Valley. Not a very technical course, didn't really have any big ascents or descents, but it was pretty fair. It had a little bit of everything. But there's one section of the course, and it was a fairly wet day, where it was fairly exposed mud on an off-camber pitch. And the shoe going through the opening few foot strikes through that mud took on some of the mud, packed it in there, and I had a tough time staying on the trail. So unlike something like the Salomon Wild Cross, which has a fairly deep 6mm lug design, which is really going to claw and grab at whatever conditions you put it in, you just have to be aware that the Switchback isn't really designed to go through really deep terrain. It'll grab fairly well at loose stones, dirt, scree, but you just have to know what it'll grab and what it won't. The amount of protection here is decent. When I first in the opening miles, I intentionally went after some technical terrain. There's one down tree that I know of specifically that I'll often go back to test shoes, where it has just one of its nubs from one of the snapped off branches sticking up. And so throwing the Switchback at it, I was really actually pleasantly surprised to find that I wasn't really getting or feeling much in the way of shots to the forefoot. If you took a fairly abrupt or pointed edge to the heel, you may feel a little bit more just because you don't have the RockPlate. But in the forefoot, while I could feel the contour and feel it basically hitting or compressing into the shoe, it wasn't at all uncomfortable. So I think it did a pretty amazing job for how minimal a shoe it really is. Outsole rubber. Outsole rubber, in addition to the outsole just lugs that are there, I don't know whether you'll be able to see it in this video, but there's really fine little points that are at the exterior point of those lugs. That was something that the Hoka Evo Jaws also used in their design, in which I think, in my experience, was really quite effective. And the Evo Jaws is probably one of the closest comparisons to the Peregrine, to the Switchback. I love them really both for the ground foot, kind of barefoot feel. Both really wanted to open up and run. Both probably not the most durable shoes in the world. Switchback probably a little bit more durable than the Evo Jaws, which had a tendency to really peel apart over technical terrain. But those nubs, I feel like, do add a little bit more traction over varied surfaces. With all that said, though, the outsole rubber that Saucony uses, it's just not the stickiest of rubber. I think I learned that when I was product testing for the Mad River in a pretty awesome clip, very unintentional, doing a creek crossing, really seeing and throwing myself into seeing what the rubber would do. Took a pretty good digger midstream crossing. So similarly, I've just learned to know, I think, what the Switchback is capable of. Outsole rubber is not going to be as sticky or tacky as Vibram rubber, for instance, used in the Topo models. It's not going to be nearly as tacky or as durable as what Innovate's using with the graphene. And it's not going to grab as well as the Contra Grip from various Salomon models. So you kind of learn what it'll do and what it won't do, and you just kind of respect those limits. But with all that said, in terms of downsides, and probably the other one is just the durability. I don't have, I think, the most faith through my experience in the durability of Wolverine products and shoes. And this is played out in a couple different brands under the Wolverine header. They'll get you probably fairly par for the course, but it's not going to be a model that's going to take you 1,000 miles or more for most people. So again, you kind of take it for what it is and just know that about the shoe. So with all that said, even though there are some definite to be aware of downsides there or considerations, it doesn't dampen at all how much I really like this shoe. It basically feels like an extension of my foot, or a sock on my foot with some extra traction and cushioning. and it really opens up. I mean, it makes me feel like a kid. It's taking Salomon's logo back there in terms of time to play. Like, I love it. The shoe just really wants to run, and I've used it in pretty versatile terrain, and it's performed actually better than I think I thought or expected. So for anybody that's really looking for a fairly versatile crossover shoe, or just one, if somebody really likes some more minimal designs, doesn't necessarily need a lot of protection, or can afford to have maybe a second shoe in the lineup that would suffice as all of that, I really can't recommend the Switchback 2 enough. I don't have a lot of miles in it yet. I'll weigh in later as we go in terms of the durability. But out of the box, in my experience with the one and seeing the design, I think improvements in materials and that design in the two, I love it already. So stop into your local run specialty store, see if they've got the Switchback. If they don't, see if they'll order it for you. Stop into Finger Lakes Running Company here in Ithaca, try it on, order it from our Trails Collective store, which we could really use your support there, whether it be the Switchback or others. Pick it up. Or if you're around my size at a race or a run, let's switch shoes and I'll let you take mine, run a few miles, I guess, in my shoes. So Saucony, I'm stoked about this update. I'm stoked for more miles in it. Thank you for continuing it on. I hope you keep it in the line for years to come. The shoe makes me happy. So thanks for tuning in to this round, Trails Collective crew, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya!